The shelter was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that only comes after a busy morning of barking, cleaning, and hopeful visitors. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, stretching across the tiled floor and stopping just short of the big wall clock above the front desk. Inside kennel number 7, a quiet brown and white dog named Oliver sat calmly, watching the room. At first, no one noticed anything unusual. Dogs sat after all. Some paced, some barked, some slept. Oliver had always been one of the calmer ones since arriving at the shelter weeks earlier. But around mid-afternoon, one of the volunteers noticed something strange. Oliver wasn't just sitting. He was sitting directly beneath the clock, perfectly still. His ears perked. His eyes fixed on the ticking hands above him. Not barking. Not whining. Just waiting. "Is he okay?" one of the staff members asked while passing by with a bucket. The volunteer shrugged. "He's been like that for a while." Minutes passed. The clock ticked loudly in the otherwise quiet hallway. Then Oliver shifted slightly and let out a soft, trembling whine. Not a cry for food. Not a bark for attention. Something else. He stood up, circled once beneath the clock, then sat down again, more rigid this time, staring upward as if the passing seconds mattered deeply to him. One of the staff members stopped what she was doing. "Does he do this every day?" Another volunteer slowly nodded. "Actually, yeah." They all looked up at the clock. The minute hand crept closer to a very specific time. And suddenly, Oliver began to tremble. But what the dog sensed was far from ordinary. Before we continue, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-touching dog stories. And tell me, where are you watching from? The shelter was always busiest in the morning. Doors opening. Kennels rattling. Metal bowls clinking against concrete floors. Dogs barked to greet the day. Some jumped excitedly against the gates. Others wagged their tails so hard their whole bodies shook. By early afternoon, though, everything slowed down. The barking faded into the occasional soft woof. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and dry kibble. Sunlight drifted through the tall windows, spreading across the quiet hallway. It was during this calmer part of the day that Oliver usually became most noticeable. Not because he barked. Not because he demanded attention. But because he didn't. Oliver was a medium-sized dog with soft brown fur and a white patch across his chest. His ears were slightly uneven, one standing tall, the other bending gently at the tip. He had the calm eyes of a dog that had seen a lot and learned to wait. Most visitors passed his kennel without noticing him. The loud dogs caught their attention first. The playful ones came second. Oliver simply sat watching. Patient. Quiet. Thoughtful. That afternoon, volunteer Megan Carter walked slowly down the hallway with a clipboard tucked under her arm. She'd been volunteering at the shelter for nearly 3 months now. Long enough to know most of the dogs. Long enough to notice when something felt different. She stopped halfway down the corridor. "Huh." Her voice was soft. Almost amused. Inside kennel number 7, Oliver was sitting again. But not in the usual spot near the gate where most dogs waited to greet people. Instead, he was sitting at the back of the kennel, directly beneath the large wall clock mounted high above the hallway. Megan tilted her head. "That's new." Oliver didn't move. His body was perfectly still. His ears were forward. His eyes were lifted slightly, not staring at Megan, but at the clock. Tick, tick, tick. The steady rhythm echoed faintly through the quiet hallway. Megan glanced up at it. 3:12 p.m. She shrugged. "Okay, buddy," she murmured. "Whatever works for you." She continued walking. Behind her, Oliver remained exactly where he was. Still. Watching. Waiting. 20 minutes later, another volunteer came through. A tall man named David Ramirez, carrying a bag of fresh blankets. He paused outside Oliver's kennel. "Hey there, pal." Oliver didn't rush forward like most dogs. He didn't bark. Instead, he remained seated, looking up. David followed the direction of the dog's gaze. He noticed the clock, then looked back at Oliver. "Waiting for dinner already?" Oliver blinked slowly. His tail thumped once against the floor. But he didn't move. David chuckled. "You're a strange one." He dropped a folded blanket inside the kennel. Oliver sniffed it briefly, then returned to his position. eyes lifting. Tick, tick, tick. Later that afternoon, the shelter manager Laura Jennings stepped into the hallway with a cup of coffee. She was reviewing adoption paperwork when Megan approached her. Laura. Yeah. Have you noticed Oliver doing something weird lately? Laura looked up. Weird how? Megan gestured down the corridor. Come see. They walked slowly together until they reached Kennel 7. Oliver was still sitting beneath the clock. Laura raised an eyebrow. Well, that's new. Right. Megan said. He's been there for like 40 minutes. Laura checked the clock again. 3:48 p.m. Oliver's ears twitched. A soft sound escaped him. Not a bark. Not quite a whine. More like a quiet breath that trembled in his chest. Megan frowned. Did you hear that? Laura nodded. Oliver stood. Just for a moment. He circled once beneath the clock, paws clicking softly on the floor. Then he sat again. More rigid this time. His eyes lifted higher. His body tense. Tick, tick, tick. The hallway felt strangely quiet now. Megan crossed her arms. Is he okay? Laura watched the dog carefully. He looks fine. But he's acting like he's waiting for something. They stood there for a moment, just listening. Then Oliver's tail moved again. Slow. Uncertain. Another soft whine slipped from his throat. Laura crouched beside the kennel. Hey, Oliver. Her voice was gentle. The dog looked at her briefly. Then his gaze drifted back upward. To the clock. 3:55 p.m. The minute hand crept forward. Almost there. Oliver's breathing changed. Faster now. He stood again. This time pacing once across the back of the kennel. Then returning. Then sitting again. Exactly beneath the clock. Megan swallowed. Okay. That's definitely weird. Laura nodded slowly. Maybe he hears something we don't. Dogs did that sometimes. They noticed things long before humans did. A distant siren. A car pulling into the parking lot. A familiar set of footsteps. Oliver leaned forward slightly. Ears high. Body alert. Tick, tick, tick. The clock shifted. 4 p.m. The sound echoed faintly through the hallway. And Oliver suddenly froze. His tail stopped moving. His body trembled. A long quiet whine rose from his chest. Not loud. Not desperate. Just sad. Megan felt a strange tightness in her chest. That didn't sound good. Laura watched the dog closely. Oliver stood again. Walked slowly toward the front of the kennel. Looked down the empty hallway. His tail lowered. Then he turned around. And returned to the back of the kennel. Sitting again beneath the clock. But this time, his head lowered slightly. Like something he had been waiting for. Hadn't come. Megan whispered quietly. Does he do this every day? Laura didn't answer right away. She was thinking. Watching. The dog sat quietly now. Still. Patient again. But the tension in his body hadn't disappeared. Something about the moment lingered in the air. Laura stood slowly. I'm not sure, she said. But now I'm curious. Megan looked at Oliver again. The dog didn't move. Didn't bark. Didn't scratch the gate. He simply sat beneath the clock. As if time itself mattered deeply to him. Laura took one last glance at the wall clock. Then back at the dog. Let's keep an eye on him tomorrow. Megan nodded. Yeah, I think we should. Behind them the clock continued its quiet rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. And Oliver kept watching it. As if he knew something. No one else had noticed yet. The next afternoon arrived quietly. Rain clouds drifted across the sky, dimming the sunlight that usually warmed the shelter hallway. The air felt heavier today, cooler. Inside the kennels, the dogs settled into their usual rhythms. Some slept. Some chewed toys. A few barked whenever footsteps echoed down the corridor. But Oliver remained calm. As always, volunteer Megan Carter walked in just before 3 o'clock, brushing a few raindrops from her jacket. Looks like we're in for a wet one, she said to David at the front desk. David glanced outside the window. Yeah, dogs won't like walk time today. Megan smiled faintly and grabbed a clipboard. She had one thing on her mind. Oliver. The memory of yesterday's strange moment kept replaying in her thoughts. The way he had stared at the clock. The way he had waited. And that soft, heartbreaking whine right when the hour changed. She couldn't quite explain why it bothered her so much. But it did. So today she decided to watch. The hallway felt quiet again. The kind of quiet that lets small sounds travel far. Ticking clocks. Clinking water bowls. Soft dog breaths behind metal gates. Megan walked past kennel 3. Then 4. Then 5. She slowed her steps as she approached number 7. Oliver was lying down. Front paws stretched out. Head resting gently between them. He looked peaceful. For a moment Megan wondered if maybe she had imagined the whole thing yesterday. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he had just been restless. Dogs did strange things sometimes. She checked the clock. 2:52 p.m. Plenty of time before 4. "All right, Oliver," she murmured. "Let's see what you do today." She sat on the bench across the hallway and began filling out feeding notes. Minutes passed. Rain tapped softly against the shelter windows. Oliver barely moved. Just a slow rise and fall of his chest. Tick, tick, tick. The clock continued its quiet rhythm above the hallway. Then, at exactly 3:10 p.m., Oliver lifted his head. Not quickly. Slowly. As if responding to something he felt more than heard. Megan froze mid-sentence on her clipboard. "There you are." Oliver blinked once. Then pushed himself up onto his paws. He stretched gently. Front legs forward. Back arched. Tail relaxed. And then he walked. Not to the kennel door. Not to the water bowl. Instead, he moved toward the back wall. Directly beneath the clock. Megan sat up straighter. "No way." Oliver circled once. Then lowered himself into a sitting position. Perfectly centered beneath the clock again. Just like yesterday. His ears tilted forward. His eyes lifted. Watching. Waiting. Megan glanced at the clock. 3:11 p.m. A slow smile spread across her face. "Okay, that's weird." She stayed quiet. Just watching. Oliver didn't fidget. Didn't scratch. Didn't lie down. He simply sat there. Completely still. Like a statue made of fur and patience. Every once in a while his ears twitched. His nose lifted slightly, catching scents drifting through the shelter air. But his eyes always returned to the clock. Tick, tick, tick. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Another volunteer walked down the hallway carrying cleaning supplies. "Hey, Megan." "Hey." The woman paused. "Why are you staring at Oliver like that?" Megan pointed upward. "Watch." The volunteer followed her finger. Clock. Then dog. Then back to Megan. "Okay. Just wait," Megan whispered. They stood there together. Observing. The dog remained motionless. Focused. The clock read 3:36 p.m. The volunteer folded her arms. "I mean, he's just sitting." "Yeah," Megan said quietly. "But yesterday he did the exact same thing." "What do you mean?" "He sat there for almost an hour. And then right at 4 o'clock. Megan hesitated. The memory returned clearly. "That sad little whine." The volunteer frowned. "Maybe he hears dinner carts rolling." "Dinner's at 5. "Oh." They both looked at Oliver again. The dog shifted slightly. Not restless. Just adjusting. Like someone preparing for something important. Tick, tick, tick. By 3:50 p.m., Megan had gathered 3 more staff members in the hallway. Now it felt less like curiosity, and more like quiet observation. Laura crossed her arms thoughtfully. "So he started at 3:10 today?" "Exactly," Megan said. "Almost the same time as yesterday." David rubbed his chin. "That's oddly precise." Oliver stood briefly. He paced once. His nails tapped lightly against the kennel floor. Then he sat again. Closer to the wall this time. Still beneath the clock. His tail moved slowly. Then stopped. Tick, tick, tick. The minute hand crept closer to the hour. Oliver's breathing changed. Faster now. His chest rose slightly with each breath. His ears lifted higher. Megan leaned forward. "He's doing it again." No one spoke. They just listened. At 3:57 p.m., Oliver let out a small sound. Not loud. Just a trembling little whimper. Laura whispered softly, "Oh, buddy." Oliver stood again. This time he walked toward the kennel gate. He looked down the hallway, eyes searching, hoping, waiting. But the hallway was empty. Just quiet lights, clean floors, the distant sound of rain outside. Oliver stayed there for a moment, then slowly turned back, returning to his place beneath the clock. Tick, tick, tick. The final seconds crept forward. The clock struck 4 p.m., and Oliver froze. His body went completely still. His ears slowly lowered. Then the same sound returned. That soft, aching whine. Longer this time. Megan felt a chill move through her arms. He's disappointed. Laura nodded quietly. The dog waited another few seconds, just in case, just hoping. Then Oliver lowered his head, walked slowly back toward the front of the kennel, and lay down. His tail tucked gently beside him. The waiting was over. For today. No one spoke for a long moment. The volunteers stood silently in the hallway, listening to the rain. Finally David exhaled. Okay. He shook his head slowly. That's not random. Laura looked back at Oliver. The dog rested quietly now, eyes half closed, but something about his posture still felt heavy, like a door that had closed again. At the same time, every day, Megan whispered softly. He's waiting for something. Laura nodded. Yes. Her voice was thoughtful now, almost certain. He definitely is. She turned toward the office. I think it's time we looked into Oliver's file. Megan glanced at the clock again, then back at the dog. The pattern was clear now. Every afternoon. Same place. Same time. Same quiet disappointment. And the question hanging in the air felt heavier than before. What exactly was Oliver waiting for? The rain continued through the night. By morning, the shelter parking lot was covered in shallow puddles that reflected the pale gray sky. Inside, the usual routine had already begun. Kennel doors clanked. Leashes jingled. Excited barks echoed down the hallway as volunteers prepared for the first dog walks of the day. Oliver sat quietly inside Kennel 7, watching. His tail moved gently when Megan passed by with a leash. Morning, Oliver, she said warmly. The dog stood and walked toward the gate. His ears lifted. He wagged once, twice. But unlike the others, he didn't jump or bark. He simply waited. Megan smiled. You want to go outside? Oliver blinked. His tail wagged again. That was enough of an answer. Outside, the air smelled fresh and damp. The grass behind the shelter glistened with morning rain. Oliver stepped carefully across the wet ground, nose low as he explored the familiar walking path. Megan gave the leash a little slack. You're a calm one, she murmured. Oliver sniffed a small patch of grass, then lifted his head. For a moment he stood completely still. His ears turned slightly toward the road beyond the shelter fence. A car passed. The distant hum of tires faded. Oliver's gaze lingered there for a few seconds. Then he returned to sniffing the grass. Megan noticed. Expecting someone? She chuckled softly at herself. Talking to dogs came naturally after a while. But Oliver didn't react. He simply continued his slow walk, calm and thoughtful, like he always was. Later that afternoon, the shelter hallway filled with the quiet sounds of volunteers preparing food bowls. Metal scoops scraped gently against bags of kibble. Dogs barked in anticipation. Oliver remained quiet. Megan checked the clock. 2:58 p.m. She looked down the hallway. Laura stood near the office door, flipping through a small stack of intake paperwork. Find anything? Megan asked. Laura sighed. Not much. She tapped the folder thoughtfully. Oliver was surrendered about 6 weeks ago. By who? Animal control. Megan frowned. So nobody knows where he came from? Not exactly. Laura glanced down at the paper again. There's a note here, says the previous owner had passed away. Megan's eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh. Laura shrugged. That's all it says. No details. No names. Just a quiet line of information buried in the file. Megan glanced toward Oliver's kennel. The dog lay calmly on his blanket, eyes half closed. Peaceful. But something about that small note in the file lingered in her mind. At 3:10 p.m. Oliver stirred. Just like the day before. His head lifted slowly. Then he stood. Megan nudged David with her elbow. Watch. David leaned against the wall, curious now. Oliver stretched once, then walked toward the back of the kennel. The same spot, directly beneath the clock. He turned in a small circle and sat. David chuckled lightly. Okay. That's pretty specific. Megan nodded. Third day in a row. Laura joined them in the hallway. So this is the famous clock ritual. Oliver's ears twitched. His eyes lifted. Tick, tick, tick. The quiet rhythm filled the hallway again. For a while no one spoke. Then another volunteer walked past carrying folded towels. She slowed when she saw everyone staring at Kennel 7. What's going on? Megan pointed. Oliver. The volunteer looked confused. He's sitting. Exactly. So. He does it every afternoon, Megan explained. Same time. Same place. The volunteer shrugged. Maybe he likes the spot. David nodded. That was my first thought too. Laura leaned against the wall. Dogs like routines. They like patterns. Comfort spots. Megan watched Oliver closely. But he doesn't look comfortable. The dog shifted slightly. His posture stiffened. His tail rested motionless beside him. Tick, tick, tick. The clock moved forward. 3:28 p.m. The volunteer with the towel spoke again. Maybe the clock sound relaxes him. David smirked. Or maybe he's a timekeeper. They laughed quietly. The tension lightened for a moment. But Megan didn't laugh. Her eyes stayed on Oliver. Something about the way he sat there felt too focused. Too intentional. Like he wasn't just sitting. He was waiting. At 3:40 p.m., Oliver's breathing changed. His chest rose slightly faster. He leaned forward. His ears lifted higher. Laura noticed. Okay. That's interesting. David frowned. Why? He's anticipating something. How can you tell? Laura gestured gently toward the dog. Look at his posture. Forward weight. Alert ears. That's not resting behavior. That's expectation. Oliver stood briefly. Walked toward the kennel gate. He looked down the hallway again. Eyes scanning. Searching. The hallway remained empty. Just quiet lights. Clean floors. And the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Oliver waited. Then slowly turned around. Returning to the back of the kennel. Sitting beneath the clock again. Megan whispered softly. He really thinks something is supposed to happen. David crossed his arms. But what? Laura didn't answer. Her eyes remained on the dog. Tick, tick, tick. The minute hand approached the hour again. Oliver's tail moved once. Then stopped. His body trembled faintly. Just a small vibration through his shoulders. Like a quiet wave of emotion he couldn't quite control. Megan felt that same tightness in her chest again. Poor guy. 3:59 p.m. Oliver stood. Walked to the gate again. This time he stayed there longer. Looking. Listening. Waiting. Tick. 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 4 p.m. The clock clicked forward. Oliver froze. His ears lowered. And once again, that soft, aching whine filled the hallway. Longer. Sad. Hopeful and then fading. The dog stood there for several seconds, still looking down the empty corridor, then slowly turned away. Returning to his blanket, he lay down quietly. The ritual had ended. Again. The volunteers stood silently. Finally David exhaled. Well, that's officially strange. The volunteer with the towels nodded. Okay, yeah, I take it back. That's not a comfort spot. Laura folded Oliver's file closed. Her voice was thoughtful now. There's something behind this. Megan looked toward the clock again, then back to Oliver. The dog rested quietly, but the weight of that waiting moment still lingered in the room. Whatever Oliver believed was supposed to happen, it hadn't happened. Not today. Not yesterday. And probably not for a long time. Laura finally spoke again. Tomorrow. We watch even closer. Megan nodded slowly, because one thing was clear now. Oliver wasn't just sitting beneath the clock. He was remembering something. Something important. And somehow, time itself seemed to matter. By the fourth day, The clock had become the center of the hallway. Not officially. No one moved it. No one spoke about it loudly. But every volunteer who worked the afternoon shift now knew the quiet routine. And they all found themselves glancing up at the clock more often than usual. Waiting. Just like Oliver did. The sky outside had cleared overnight. Bright sunlight streamed through the shelter windows, casting long golden rectangles across the polished floor. Dust floated gently in the warm light. It was peaceful. Almost too peaceful. Inside Kennel 7, Oliver rested on his blanket. His head lay between his paws, but his eyes were open, watching. Megan noticed it immediately when she arrived. "Hey there, buddy." Oliver lifted his head when he heard her voice. His tail wagged softly. Just once. Megan crouched by the kennel gate. "You ready for your walk?" Oliver stood and stretched slowly, front legs forward, back arching gently. His ears tilted toward her. For a moment he looked like any other calm shelter dog. Nothing unusual. Nothing mysterious. Just a quiet companion waiting for a little time outside. The air outside smelled like fresh grass and warm pavement. Birds chirped from the trees beyond the shelter fence. Oliver walked beside Megan with relaxed steps, nose moving from scent to scent. He paused near the edge of the yard, lifted his head. Listen. A car passed on the distant road. Its sound faded quickly. Oliver remained still for a moment longer than usual, his ears angled toward the road. Then he exhaled softly and continued walking. Megan noticed again. "You always check that direction." Oliver didn't respond, but his tail moved slightly. By early afternoon, the shelter had quieted again. The loud morning energy had faded. Visitors had come and gone. Most of the dogs had settled down. The hallway felt calm. But underneath that calm, something else lingered now. Expectation. Megan stood beside the front desk with Laura and David. The clock read 3:05 p.m. David folded his arms. "So we're really doing this again?" Laura nodded. "Yes." Megan glanced toward Kennel 7. Oliver was still lying down. "He hasn't moved yet." David smirked. "Maybe today he breaks the streak." Laura didn't look convinced. "We'll see." Tick, tick, tick. The clock moved slowly forward. At 3:10 p.m., Oliver lifted his head. All three volunteers noticed at the same moment. "There it is," Megan whispered. Oliver stood. He stretched his legs, then walked calmly toward the back of the kennel. The same path, the same place. He circled once, then sat, directly beneath the clock. David shook his head. "Unbelievable." Megan crossed her arms. "He's never late." Laura watched quietly. Her eyes moved between the dog and the clock. This means something to him. More volunteers began to gather. Not many. Just a few curious ones who had heard about the strange routine. They stood quietly along the hallway wall, watching. Oliver remained still, his ears forward, his gaze lifted. Tick, tick, tick. Minutes passed. The tension built slowly. No barking. No sudden movement. Just quiet anticipation. At 3:25 p.m., Oliver shifted slightly. He leaned forward, his paws adjusting against the kennel floor. Laura noticed. "He's getting restless earlier today." David frowned. "You think he senses something?" "Maybe." Oliver stood, walked a few steps toward the gate, then returned to the clock again, sitting down. But this time his body looked tighter, more alert. His tail rested stiffly behind him. Megan whispered softly. "He's nervous." Tick, tick, tick. The clock read 3:37 p.m. Oliver's ears twitched sharply. He lifted his head higher. Then he stood again, this time pacing along the back wall of the kennel, back and forth, back and forth. The volunteers exchanged glances. "That's new," David murmured. Oliver paused, looked down the hallway again. His nose lifted, testing the air. But the hallway remained quiet. No footsteps, no voices, just distant sounds from the office. He returned beneath the clock again, but instead of sitting immediately, he hesitated, as if something inside him was unsure. Then slowly he sat. Tick, Tick, tick. The room felt heavier now. Megan rubbed her arms. Why does this feel sad? Laura didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on Oliver. Because he believes something is supposed to happen. And it keeps not happening. At 3:50 p.m., Oliver's breathing had clearly changed. His chest rose faster. His body leaned forward. His eyes moved constantly between the clock and the hallway. The waiting had turned into something deeper now. Hope, David whispered quietly. Maybe someone used to pick him up at this time. Laura nodded slowly. That's possible. Oliver stood again. This time he walked quickly to the kennel gate. His nails tapped sharply against the floor. He stared down the hallway. His tail lifted slightly. For a moment he looked excited, like he recognized something. The volunteers leaned forward, listening. But the hallway remained empty. Oliver waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Then his tail lowered. His ears drooped slightly. He turned around slowly, walking back toward the clock again. The disappointment came earlier today. But he still sat beneath the clock. Still waited. Still hoped. Tick, tick, tick. 3:59 p.m. The entire hallway had gone silent now. Even the dogs seemed calmer, almost as if they sensed the strange moment approaching. Oliver stood once more. His body trembled faintly. He stepped toward the kennel gate again. His eyes searched the hallway, hoping, waiting. Tick, tick, tick. The clock reached 4 p.m. The small click echoed softly. Oliver froze. Then the sound came again. That same long, aching whine. But this time it was louder. Not loud enough to be a bark, but strong enough to fill the hallway. The volunteers felt it instantly. Megan covered her mouth. Oh my gosh. Oliver waited there for a few seconds longer. Still looking. Still hoping. But the hallway stayed empty. And slowly the energy left his body. His tail dropped. His ears lowered. He walked back to his blanket, lay down, and rested his head between his paws. The waiting was over. Again. No one spoke for a moment. Finally David exhaled quietly. Okay. This isn't just a habit. Laura nodded. Her voice was soft now. He's remembering something. Megan glanced at the clock again, then back at Oliver. The dog's eyes were open, but distant, as if his thoughts had gone somewhere else, somewhere outside the shelter walls. Laura looked down at Oliver's file again, her expression thoughtful. I think tomorrow, we need to dig deeper into his past, because the pattern was clear now. Every afternoon, the same moment, the same hope, and the same quiet heartbreak when nothing came. Oliver wasn't just watching the clock. He was waiting for someone who never arrived. The next morning arrived with soft sunlight and cool air drifting through the shelter windows. The building woke slowly. Keys rattled. Lights clicked on. The first dogs greeted the day with eager barks and wagging tails. But Oliver remained quiet. He sat calmly inside Kennel 7, watching the hallway as volunteers moved through their morning routines. Megan paused beside his kennel on her way to the office. Morning, Oliver. His tail wagged gently. Just once. His eyes followed her as she walked away. Then he rested his chin back on his paws. Patient, as always. Inside the small office near the front desk, Laura Jennings sat at the computer. Oliver's intake file lay open beside her. Megan stepped inside with 2 cups of coffee. Any luck? Laura accepted the cup and nodded slowly. Maybe. She tapped the keyboard. I called animal control this morning. Megan pulled up a chair. And they gave me a little more information about where Oliver came from. Laura turned the computer screen slightly so Megan could see. A scanned report filled the monitor. It wasn't long, just a few short paragraphs. But one line stood out. Owner deceased. Megan leaned forward. Do they know who the owner was? Laura nodded. An older man. Name was Walter Green. The name sat quietly in the room for a moment. Megan tilted her head. Was Oliver his dog? Seems like it. Laura scrolled further down. The neighbors called animal control after Mr. Green passed away. They said the dog stayed on the front porch for 2 days. Megan felt a small knot form in her chest. 2 days. Laura nodded gently. Just sitting there. Waiting. The word hung in the air. Waiting. Megan slowly leaned back in her chair. That sounds familiar. Laura gave a quiet nod. Exactly what I was thinking. She looked down at another note in the file. There's more. Megan leaned forward again. What? Laura pointed at the line. Neighbor statement. Megan read it silently. Then her eyes widened slightly. What time? Laura answered quietly. 4 o'clock. Later that afternoon, the shelter hallway felt different. The volunteers moved a little slower, spoke a little softer. Everyone knew something now. Something important. The clock on the wall ticked steadily above them. Tick, tick, tick. Megan stood beside Laura near Kennel 7. Oliver rested calmly on his blanket. The dog didn't know they had learned something about him, but the atmosphere around him had changed. Laura checked the clock. 3:08 p.m. Almost time, she said softly. David leaned against the opposite wall. So what exactly did the neighbor say again? Laura glanced at the printed report in her hand. She said Mr. Green used to walk Oliver every day. Same time. Same route. Megan finished the sentence quietly. 4 o'clock. Laura nodded. Exactly 4. The volunteers exchanged quiet looks. Suddenly the strange pattern made sense. At 3:10 p.m., Oliver lifted his head. Just like every day. He stood slowly, stretched his legs, and walked toward the back of the kennel, directly beneath the clock. He turned once, then sat, watching, waiting. But this time the volunteers understood why. Megan felt her throat tighten slightly. He thinks it's almost walk time. Laura nodded. That was probably their routine. Every day. 4 o'clock. A walk with his person. Oliver's ears lifted. His gaze moved between the clock and the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. The minutes passed. 3:20 p.m. Oliver sat perfectly still, his tail resting gently behind him. 3:28 p.m. He shifted slightly. His nose lifted as if catching a distant scent. 3:35 p.m. He stood briefly, walked to the kennel gate, looked down the hallway, then returned beneath the clock. The volunteers watched quietly. Now the moment felt heavier. Not strange, not confusing, just sad. David rubbed the back of his neck. So he's been doing this every day? Laura nodded. Probably since he arrived. Megan whispered softly. And before that, he probably waited at home. Oliver's ears twitched suddenly. He stood again, walked toward the gate. His tail lifted slightly. Hope flickered through his body. The volunteers followed his gaze down the hallway. But no one was coming. No footsteps. No familiar voice. Just quiet shelter sounds. Oliver waited, then slowly turned around, returning beneath the clock again. Tick, tick, tick. The minute hand crept closer to 4. Oliver's breathing changed. Faster now. His body leaned forward. The same hopeful anticipation. But now the volunteers could picture the past. An older man reaching for a leash. A front door opening. Footsteps on a sidewalk. A daily walk. A simple moment of companionship. Every single afternoon. At the same time. 3:58 p.m. Oliver stood again. He moved toward the kennel gate. His tail wagged slowly. His ears lifted high. The volunteers remained silent. 3:59 p.m. Oliver leaned forward, eyes fixed on the hallway, waiting, just like he must have waited by the door at home. Tick, tick, tick. 4 p.m. The clock clicked forward. Oliver froze. Then the sound came again. That soft, aching whine. But this time the volunteers understood it completely. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't fear. It was disappointment. Quiet, gentle, patient disappointment. Oliver stood there for several seconds, still hoping someone might appear. Then his tail lowered. His ears softened, and he slowly turned away. Walking back to his blanket, he lay down quietly, head resting between his paws. The waiting was over. For today. Again. The hallway remained silent. Megan wiped at the corner of her eye. Oh, Oliver. Laura folded the intake report carefully. Her voice was calm but full of emotion. He doesn't know. David frowned slightly. Know what? That Mr. Green isn't coming back. They looked toward the dog. Oliver blinked slowly. Peaceful now. But the sadness lingered in the room. The clock continued ticking above them. Tick, tick, tick. Megan spoke softly. We can't let him wait alone anymore. Laura nodded. No. She looked back at the dog. Her voice warm and certain. Tomorrow. At 4 o'clock. Someone will be there. The next afternoon arrived quietly. The shelter moved through its usual rhythm. But something had changed. The volunteers carried the same tasks. Cleaning kennels. Preparing food bowls. Answering visitor questions. Yet beneath the routine there was a shared understanding now. Everyone knew what 4 o'clock meant. Not just for the schedule. For Oliver. At 2:45 p.m., Megan sat on the bench across from Kennel 7. Oliver rested on his blanket. His eyes were half closed, but he wasn't asleep. He rarely slept deeply during the afternoons. Not anymore. Megan gently rolled a tennis ball between her hands. Hey, Oliver. His ears twitched at the sound of her voice. His tail moved slowly against the floor. She tossed the ball softly into the kennel. It rolled toward him. Oliver watched it for a moment, then nudged it gently with his nose. But he didn't chase it. Instead, he returned to his quiet resting position. Megan smiled softly. You've got other things on your mind, don't you? Across the hallway, Laura stepped out of the office. She carried a small leash. Megan noticed immediately. You're doing it today? Laura nodded. I think we all should. David appeared from the storage room, wiping his hands on a towel. I'm in. The moment felt simple. No big announcement. Just 3 people deciding to show up. At 3:05 p.m., the hallway had grown calm again. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows. The air smelled faintly of clean floors and fresh dog bedding. Oliver still rested quietly, but every few minutes his eyes drifted toward the clock. Tick, tick, tick. At 3:10 p.m. he lifted his head. Right on time. Megan whispered gently. There it is. Oliver stood. He stretched slowly, then walked toward the back of the kennel. The same place. The same routine. He circled once, then sat beneath the clock, watching, waiting. But today he wasn't alone. Laura crouched beside the kennel gate. She didn't interrupt him, didn't call his name. She simply sat nearby. David leaned quietly against the wall. Megan stayed on the bench. The volunteers gave Oliver space, but their presence filled the hallway with something warmer, something gentler. Tick, tick, tick. The clock moved steadily forward. 3:18 p.m. Oliver's ears twitched slightly. He shifted his paws, then looked toward the hallway again. He expected something to happen. He always did. But today, something small had already changed. Laura spoke softly. Hey there, buddy. Oliver glanced at her. Just briefly. His tail moved once against the floor. Then his gaze lifted back to the clock. Tick, tick, tick. 3:26 p.m. Oliver stood. He walked toward the kennel gate. His nose lifted slightly. He sniffed the air. Laura gently reached her hand through the bars. Not grabbing. Not pulling. Just resting her fingers where he could reach them. Oliver hesitated, then stepped closer. He sniffed her hand. His tail moved again. Slowly. For a moment, the tension in his body softened. Then he turned, returning beneath the clock once more. The waiting continued. By 3:40 p.m., Oliver's anticipation had begun to build. His breathing quickened. His posture leaned forward. His ears stayed lifted. David whispered quietly. He's getting ready. Laura nodded. That's when the routine probably started. At home. The leash. The door opening. The familiar steps outside. Oliver stood again. He walked to the gate. Looked down the hallway. Then back to the clock. Then down the hallway again. Hope flickered through his movements. But today the volunteers were ready. Laura stood slowly. She opened the small kennel door. Oliver turned his head. Surprised. Laura knelt beside him. Her voice soft. Gentle. Hey, Oliver. The dog blinked. She held up the leash, not pushing it toward him, just letting him see it. His ears lifted instantly. His tail moved faster now. Laura clipped the leash to his collar. The small metal click echoed softly. For a moment Oliver simply stood there, processing. Something felt familiar. Something felt right. Tick, tick, tick. The clock read 3:55 p.m. Laura stood. Come on, buddy. Oliver followed her out of the kennel. His paws stepped onto the hallway floor. His nose lifted. He looked around. The volunteers watched quietly. Megan smiled warmly. Hi, Oliver. His tail wagged gently, but his eyes still kept drifting upward, toward the clock, toward the hallway door, toward the possibility of something familiar. They walked slowly down the hallway together. Oliver stayed close beside Laura, his steps careful, expectant. At 3:58 p.m., they reached the shelter's front door. Sunlight spilled through the glass. Oliver stopped. His ears lifted high. He looked at the door, then back at Laura, then toward the clock again behind them. Tick, tick, tick. The final seconds passed. 4 p.m. The clock clicked forward. Oliver froze. The same moment, the same time, but this time, Laura opened the door. Warm afternoon air drifted inside. Oliver stepped forward slowly, his nose filled with outdoor scents. Grass, sunlight, distant cars. For a moment he hesitated, as if remembering something. Then Laura spoke softly. Walk time. Oliver stepped outside. His tail lifted higher than anyone had seen in days. The volunteers followed them to the doorway. Watching quietly, Oliver looked around the yard. His ears turned. His nose moved quickly. Then he began walking. Slow at first, then with a little more energy. A familiar rhythm returned to his steps, like a memory awakening in his body. Megan felt tears sting her eyes. There it is. David smiled gently. He remembers. Outside, Oliver walked beside Laura through the grass, the leash loose between them, the sunlight warm on his back. He paused near the fence, lifted his head. For a moment he looked down the road beyond the shelter, maybe remembering the old walks, maybe remembering the man who used to walk beside him. But then Laura spoke again. Good boy, Oliver. The dog looked up at her. His tail wagged slowly, and something inside him seemed to ease just a little. The waiting moment had changed. Not completely. Not yet. But for the first time in many days, Oliver didn't spend 4 o'clock alone. The next few days settled into a new rhythm. Not a big change. Not something loud or dramatic. Just small, steady moments that slowly reshaped the afternoons at the shelter. And at the center of it all was Oliver. On Monday afternoon, the sunlight came through the windows in long golden lines. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh bedding and warm air drifting in from outside. Megan checked the clock. 3:02 p.m. She smiled to herself. Almost time. Across the room, David was filling water bowls. You're watching the clock again, he said. Megan shrugged playfully. Someone has to. They both looked toward Kennel 7. Oliver rested on his blanket, calm and quiet. But his eyes were open. Watching. Waiting. Not anxiously. Just aware. The way he always had been. Laura stepped out of the office holding the leash. Ready. David nodded. Always. Megan stood up from the bench. I'll come too. The moment had become something shared now. A quiet promise the volunteers kept every afternoon. They didn't say it out loud, but everyone understood. At 4 o'clock, Oliver would not be alone. At 3:10 p.m., Oliver lifted his head. The pattern still lived inside him. Some routines run deep. He stood, stretched his front legs, then walked calmly toward the back of the kennel. The same place beneath the clock. He turned once. Saturday. Watched. Tick, tick, tick. The volunteers didn't interrupt. They simply stayed nearby. Oliver's ears twitched occasionally. His nose lifted now and then. But something had softened in his posture. The sharp tension from the previous days had faded slightly. The waiting was still there. But the loneliness was not quite as heavy. At 3:25 p.m., Megan crouched beside the kennel gate. Hey, Oliver. The dog glanced at her. His tail tapped gently against the floor. Just once. Then his gaze lifted again to the clock. Tick, tick, tick. David leaned against the wall. You know, he's calmer now. Laura nodded. He's starting to trust the new routine. Dogs understand patterns quickly, especially when those patterns bring comfort, especially when they replace something painful. At 3:45 p.m. Oliver stood. This part of the routine still carried the most emotion. He walked toward the gate. His ears lifted. His eyes moved down the hallway, searching, still hoping. But now the hallway didn't stay empty for long. Laura stepped forward with the leash. Oliver's tail wagged slowly, a little faster than before. She knelt beside him. Ready for your walk? The small metal clip clicked onto his collar. Oliver blinked, then leaned slightly toward the door. Megan smiled. That's definitely progress. By 3:58 p.m., they stood near the shelter entrance again. The glass door glowed softly with afternoon light. Oliver sat beside Laura, his tail moving gently against the floor. His eyes shifted between the clock behind him and the door ahead. Tick, tick, tick. The final seconds passed. 4 p.m. The clock clicked forward, and just like the day before, the door opened. Fresh air drifted inside. Oliver stood immediately. His body moved with a quiet certainty now. Walk time. Outside, the grass rustled softly in the breeze. Birds chirped from the trees. Oliver stepped forward with calm confidence. The leash hung loose. Laura walked beside him. Megan and David followed a few steps behind. Oliver paused near the edge of the yard. He lifted his head, looked toward the road beyond the fence, the same direction he always watched. For a moment he stayed there, still, thinking, remembering. Then he exhaled softly and turned back toward Laura. His tail wagged, slow, gentle, but steady. Something inside him had shifted. The memory was still there. The routine still mattered. But the sadness had started to loosen its grip. Over the next week, the pattern repeated. Every afternoon, 3:10 p.m., Oliver moved beneath the clock. 3:45 p.m., he walked to the gate. 4 p.m., the door opened. Walk time. But something beautiful began to grow in those quiet moments. Oliver started greeting the volunteers earlier. His tail wagged more often. He even began bringing a tennis ball toward the kennel gate sometimes. A small offering. A small sign of trust. Megan noticed it first. He's smiling now. David chuckled. I didn't know dogs could smile. Oh, they can. Laura watched Oliver carefully one afternoon as he stepped outside again. The sunlight caught the white patch on his chest. His ears lifted in the warm breeze. His steps felt lighter now. Not rushed. Not heavy. Just comfortable. Healing rarely happens all at once. Sometimes it grows slowly. One kind moment at a time. One shared walk. One gentle voice. One open door. A week later, Megan sat on the bench again as the afternoon approached. Oliver lay quietly inside his kennel, but when he saw her, his tail wagged immediately. Megan smiled. Well, hello there. She tossed the tennis ball toward him. This time Oliver picked it up. He trotted to the gate and dropped it near her feet. David laughed from down the hallway. Okay, that's definitely a smile. Laura looked up at the clock. 3:09 p.m. Almost time. Oliver seemed to know it too. He lifted his head, stood, walked calmly toward the back of the kennel, and sat beneath the clock. The same routine, the same quiet patience. But now, when he looked toward the hallway, he didn't look lonely anymore. He looked hopeful, because somewhere along the way, Oliver had learned something new. At 4 o'clock, someone would come. The afternoons at the shelter had changed. Not in a loud way. Not in a way visitors would immediately notice. But the volunteers felt it every day. There was a moment now, a quiet pause in the routine, a shared understanding, and it always happened around the same time. The clock on the hallway wall read 2:55 p.m. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting soft golden patterns across the floor. Some dogs slept. Others chewed quietly on toys. The shelter carried the calm energy of a place settling into the middle of the day. Megan walked slowly down the hallway carrying a tennis ball. Hey Oliver. Inside Kennel 7, Oliver lifted his head immediately. His ears perked. His tail wagged against the floor. Not slowly like before. Now it moved with easy confidence. Megan rolled the ball gently toward him. Oliver caught it with his paws, then trotted toward the kennel gate. He dropped the ball near her feet. David watched from the end of the hallway. Well, that's definitely a smile. Megan laughed softly. He's feeling better. Oliver sat near the gate now, watching the volunteers move around the hallway. His eyes were brighter than they had been weeks ago. The quiet sadness that once lingered in his posture had softened. Not gone completely. Memories never disappear entirely. But something new had grown beside those memories. Trust. At 3:08 p.m., Laura stepped out of the office holding the familiar leash. All right, she said with a small smile. Let's get ready. David leaned against the wall. Wouldn't miss it. Megan glanced at the clock. 2 minutes. Oliver seemed to sense it too. He stood slowly, walked calmly toward the back of the kennel, and sat beneath the clock. The volunteers smiled. The routine had become something comforting now. Not just for Oliver. For everyone. Tick, tick, tick. The seconds moved forward. Oliver's ears lifted slightly. His gaze drifted toward the hallway. Not tense. Not desperate. Just expectant. At 3:25 p.m., a visitor stepped through the shelter's front door. The soft chime echoed down the hallway. Megan turned. A woman stood just inside the entrance. She looked to be in her mid-30s. Dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail. A light jacket draped over her shoulders. She looked around the shelter quietly, taking in the kennels, the volunteers, the dogs. Hi there, Megan called gently. Welcome. The woman smiled politely. Hi. Her eyes moved slowly down the hallway, as if searching for something though she wasn't sure what. I was thinking about adopting, she said. David gestured toward the kennels. Well, you came to the right place. The woman stepped farther inside. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished floor. And that's when Oliver noticed her. Inside Kennel 7 he lifted his head. His ears turned forward. His nose lifted slightly. He sniffed the air. Then he stood. Not toward the clock this time. Toward the gate. Megan noticed immediately. Huh. Oliver walked closer. His tail moved slowly. Curious. The woman continued walking down the hallway, looking at the dogs, smiling softly at each one. But when she reached Kennel 7, she stopped. Oliver stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on her face. The woman tilted her head slightly. Oh. She crouched down. Hi there. Oliver stepped closer. His nose moved gently toward her hand. He sniffed once, then again. His tail began to wag faster. Megan whispered to Laura. That's new. Oliver almost never approached strangers that quickly. The woman scratched gently behind his ears. Well, hello, sweetheart. Oliver leaned slightly into her touch. A small, contented breath leaving his chest. The moment felt natural, easy, as if they had met before. The clock continued ticking above them. Tick, tick, tick. Laura glanced at it. 3:50 p.m. Walk time soon. The woman looked up. Walk. Megan nodded. Every afternoon at 4. The woman smiled. That's a good routine. Oliver was still watching her closely, his tail wagging steadily. She stood slowly. Can I walk with him? Laura and Megan exchanged a glance. Then Laura nodded. Of course. She opened the kennel door. Oliver stepped out calmly. The leash clicked gently onto his collar. The woman waited patiently beside him. Oliver looked up at her. Curious. Trusting. By 3:58 p.m., they stood near the shelter entrance again. The same place. The same moment. Oliver sat quietly beside the woman now, his tail brushing softly against the floor. The volunteers stood nearby, watching. The clock ticked behind them. Tick, tick, tick. 4 p.m. The clock clicked forward. Laura opened the door. Warm sunlight spilled inside. Oliver stepped forward immediately, but this time, he walked beside the woman. Not Laura. Not Megan. The leash rested comfortably in the woman's hand. They stepped outside together. The grass moved gently in the breeze. Oliver walked confidently at her side, as if the path already felt familiar. The volunteers watched from the doorway. Megan folded her arms softly. Look at that. David smiled. He chose her. Outside, Oliver paused near the fence. He looked toward the road again, the same direction he always looked, the place where memories still lived. But this time he didn't linger long. He turned back, looked up at the woman beside him. His tail wagged, and together they continued walking. A week later, the shelter hallway looked much the same. Same polished floors, same ticking clock, same quiet afternoon light. But Kennel 7 stood empty. A small adoption card now hung on the gate. Megan stood beside it with a warm smile. Oliver Green, she read softly. David leaned against the wall. They kept the last name. Laura nodded. The woman adopted him. Her name is Emily Green. Megan raised an eyebrow. Wait. Green. Laura smiled gently. She was Mr. Green's granddaughter. The realization filled the quiet hallway. Megan looked back at the empty kennel. He found his way back to family. Laura glanced up at the clock. Tick, tick, tick. For a clock approached again. For a moment they all stood there, remembering the quiet dog who once waited beneath the clock, waiting for someone who never came. But sometimes, life finds a way to answer that waiting, just in a different form. And somewhere across town, at exactly 4 o'clock, Oliver walked down a quiet sidewalk beside Emily, his tail wagging, his steps steady, his heart finally at peace. Because the bond between a dog and the people he loves doesn't disappear with time. It only waits until it finds its way home again.